The silence in our home used to feel like peace, a sanctuary from the chaotic world of high-stakes architecture. Now it feels like a burial shroud. My name is Ethan Thorne. I am an architect. I spend my days calculating the structural integrity of skyscrapers, ensuring every beam can withstand the pressure of the world. I thought I had applied that same precision to my marriage with Sarah. I believed our foundation was earthquake-proof. It was our 7th anniversary. I had left the firm at 5 p.m., skipping a final strategy meeting for the Harbor Point project to stop by Ellison's fine jewelry. In my pocket sat a vintage gold locket, a piece Sarah had admired in a catalog months ago. I imagined the look on her face, that soft, radiant smile that had been my North Star for a decade. I entered the house through the side mudroom, my movements hushed, intending to sneak up and surprise her with a glass of her favorite chilled Chardonnay. But as I reached the edge of the kitchen, the air grew unnaturally cold. Sarah was on the phone, the speakerphone's tinny output echoing against the granite countertops. I heard a laugh, a sharp, jagged sound that didn't belong to the woman I loved. "He actually thinks I'm happy," she said, her voice dripping with a disdain I didn't recognize. "He's so predictable, Brenda. He comes home, talks about blueprints for an hour, and looks at me like I'm some kind of goddess. Honestly, it's nauseating. He's just a paycheck with a pulse, nothing more. I'm counting down the days until the settlement clears. Once I have the Thorne estate in my name, he can go back to the gutter he crawled out of. He's not a husband. He's an easy mark." My heart didn't just break, it detonated. The man I was died in that hallway, replaced by a cold, hollow shell. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Here on Family Secrets and Revenge, we know that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who claims to love you. I stood frozen in the hallway for what felt like hours, though it was likely only seconds. The velvet box of the locket dug into my palm, a physical reminder of a devotion that was now obsolete. My mind, usually so logical, became a chaotic storm of red. Every memory of the last 7 years began to rewrite itself. On those late nights I worked until my eyes bled to pay off her father's medical bills, I was just an easy mark being exploited. The vacation to Tuscany last summer, a paycheck funding her getaway. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. Years of designing complex structures had taught me one thing. When you find a terminal flaw in a building's foundation, you don't kick the wall down while you're still standing inside. You evacuate, you plan, and you execute a controlled demolition. I quietly backed away, slipping out the mudroom door. The rain was beginning to fall over Oakridge, Illinois, a city built on the illusion of suburban perfection. I sat in my car, the engine cold, staring at the warm glow of the kitchen window. I watched her shadow move across the blinds, a woman I now realized I didn't know at all. Sarah wasn't my partner. She was a predator who had spent 7 years learning my weaknesses so she could exploit them for a final payout. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't going to be her victim. I was going to be her architect of ruin. I waited 20 minutes in the driveway, forcing my breathing to slow, letting the initial shock harden into a cold, calculating numbness. When I finally walked back into the house, I stomped my boots loudly to announce my presence, playing the role of the predictable husband she despised. She emerged from the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand, her face wearing a mask of domestic bliss, so convincing it made my skin crawl. "Happy anniversary, darling," she beamed, leaning in for a kiss. I smelled the wine on her breath, the expensive vintage I had paid for. I felt her lips touch my cheek, the lips that had just called me nauseating. "I have a surprise," I said, pulling the locket from my pocket. I watched her eyes light up, not with love, but with the predatory gleam of a jeweler evaluating an asset. She opened it, gasping in feigned delight. "Oh, Ethan, it's beautiful. You're too good to me." "I want you to have the best, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady, "because you've given me so much." Every word was a double-edged sword. That night, at the Gilded Lily, I watched her sip $100 Cabernet and perform the role of the devoted wife. I sat across from her, nodding and smiling, while my mind was already drafting the blueprints for a counteroffensive. I realized then that if I wanted to survive this, I had to become a better actor than she was. The following Monday, I didn't go to my firm. Instead, I drove to the north end of Oakridge, a place of gray warehouses and forgotten dreams, far from the manicured lawns of our neighborhood. I climbed a set of creaky stairs to an office that smelled of stale coffee and old legal pads. Marcus Vance was a man who dealt in the currency of secrets. A former forensic accountant for the FBI turned private investigator, he was the person you called when you wanted to dismantle someone's life with surgical precision. I laid out the situation, the offshore movement of funds I'd suspected, the mention of the settlement, and the woman named Brenda. My wife is draining me, I told him, my voice like flint. She thinks I'm a paycheck with a pulse. I want to know who she's talking to, where the money's going, and who Robert is. I want a digital trail of every lie she's told me in the last 18 months. Vance leaned back, his eyes scanning the blueprints of my life with a clinical coldness. This kind of work isn't cheap, Ethan. And once I find what's behind the door, you can't unsee it. You're asking for a total war. I'm an architect, Marcus, I replied. I don't mind a mess as long as the final structure is solid. I don't want to just see the door. I want to own the house it's attached to. He nodded slowly, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in the dark. The counter-investigation had begun. 3 days later, Vance called me to a secure location, a quiet corner of the Oakridge Public Library. He opened a laptop and showed me a web of transactions that made my head spin. Sarah hadn't just been skimming off the top of our household budget. She'd been creating ghost vendors for my architectural firm. Since she handled our personal books and had secondary access to the firm's bookkeeping, she had been paying out thousands of dollars a month to a company called Azure Management. It looked like legitimate consulting fees on paper, but Vance had dug deeper. Who owns Azure? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Vance clicked a button, and a photo appeared on the screen. It was a man I recognized instantly from industry galas and city council meetings. Robert Sterling, the CEO of Sterling and Associates, my firm's most bitter rival. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Have you ever found out that your partner was actually working for your greatest enemy? Or how would you react if you were in my shoes, discovering your marriage was actually a corporate heist? The realization hit me with the force of a falling beam. This wasn't just a divorce. This was corporate espionage. Robert Sterling had been trying to beat me for years, but my designs were always more efficient, more innovative. He couldn't win on talent, so he decided to infiltrate my home. Sarah wasn't just leaving me. She was helping him dismantle my legacy from the inside out. Vance showed me the email logs. They were laced with intimate photos and cold-blooded strategies. They laughed about my work ethic, calling it a tool for their own wealth. They were planning to wait until I signed the Harbor Point contract, the biggest project in the history of the city. Once the initial funding was deposited into the firm's operating account, Sarah was going to trigger a legal freeze based on a fraudulent claim of marital misconduct, effectively locking the funds while Robert stepped in to save the project. It was a perfect plan. If I hadn't come home early for our anniversary, I would have been blindsided, bankrupted, and disgraced within the month. I looked at the screen, at their digital laughter, and felt the last shard of my old self vanish. I was no longer just a husband or an architect. I was a man with a target, and I had the blueprints to hit it. I am an architect. I know that if a structure is built on a lie, all you have to do is remove one load-bearing pillar and the whole thing comes crashing down. I began my countermove that very evening. I came home, kissed Sarah on the cheek, and acted like the same predictable man she mocked on the phone. But over a dinner of grilled salmon and expensive wine, I started confiding in her. The Harbor Point project is getting complicated, Sarah, I said, rubbing my temples as if exhausted by the weight of it all. I watched her eyes sharpen, that predatory focus masked as wifely concern. The city is worried about transparency, so I've had to move the primary funding. The main firm accounts are just for show now. She leaned in, her voice a soft, poisonous purr. Oh, Where did you move it, Ethan? Is it safe? I opened a private offshore fund in the Caymans, I lied, looking her straight in the eye. 30 million for the first phase. I've written the access codes and the encryption keys in my black ledger in the office. It's the only copy. If anything happened to that ledger, the project would be paralyzed. I knew she'd be in that office the second I pulled out of the driveway the next morning, and I knew exactly who she would call. The next day, I didn't go to the construction site. I drove 2 blocks away, parked in the shadow of an old oak tree, and opened my laptop. I had installed a pinhole camera in the vent of my home office just the night before. At 9:15 a.m., the motion alert buzzed on my phone. I watched the screen in high definition as Sarah entered the room. She didn't look like the woman I had married. She looked like a common thief. Her face was twisted with a frantic, ugly greed as she fumbled with the lock on my desk drawer. When she found the black ledger, she let out a breathy, triumphant laugh that made my blood run cold. She snapped high-resolution photos of the access codes, which were actually a series of digital triggers I had programmed to alert me the moment they were entered into a banking portal. Before she even left the room, she was dialing. "Robert, I have it. The Cayman codes. He's more of an idiot than we thought. He practically handed them to me. We can move the money tonight and be out of the country before the board meeting on Friday. He won't even know what hit him." I sat in the silence of my car, watching her through the screen, feeling a strange, hollow sense of peace. The trap was set. The predator had finally stepped into the cage. While Sarah and Robert were busy celebrating their perceived victory, I was in a dimly lit server room I had rented under a shell company name. Modern buildings are managed by code as much as they are by steel, and I had used my expertise to create a digital honeypot. The access codes Sarah stole didn't lead to a Cayman account. They led to a specialized server that would track the IP address, keystrokes, and banking credentials of anyone who attempted to log in. I watched the screen as the login attempt came through at 11:42 p.m. The location was traced back to a luxury penthouse suite in downtown Oakridge, Robert Sterling's private residence. As they entered the codes, they weren't withdrawing money. They were digitally signing an admission of unauthorized access to proprietary corporate data in international banking systems. Every click was a nail in the coffin of their careers. I sat there, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes, and for the first time in a week I smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of cold architectural satisfaction. They thought I was a paycheck with a pulse. They were about to find out that this pulse was connected to a mind that played for keeps. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Have you ever had to sit across from someone and pretend everything was fine while you knew they were actively trying to destroy you? The next morning, the sun rose over Oakridge with a deceptive warmth, casting long, golden shadows across our manicured lawn. I walked into the kitchen to find Sarah making pancakes. She was humming, a cheerful, light tune that made my stomach churn. She looked like the picture of a supportive wife, and I'm dressed in a silk robe I had bought her for her last birthday. "Sleep well, honey?" she asked, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "Like a baby," I lied, sitting at the table and opening the local business journal. "The Harbor Point project is moving ahead perfectly. I'm meeting the city council this afternoon to finalize the funding transfers and sign the final contracts. It's the biggest day of my career." I saw her hand tremble slightly as she set a plate in front of me. She thought she had already moved that money. She thought I was walking into a meeting to find my accounts empty and my reputation in tatters. "That's wonderful, Ethan. You've worked so hard. You deserve a break after this. Maybe we should take that trip to the Maldives we talked about." "You're right," I said, looking her dead in the eye, my voice devoid of emotion. "I think a long trip is in order, somewhere where the past can't catch up to us." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She was already mentally packing her bags for a life with Robert Sterling, fueled by my stolen millions. At 2 p.m., I walked into the Oakridge City Council chambers. The room was grand, with vaulted ceilings and heavy oak furniture, the kind of place where legacies are made or destroyed. Robert Sterling was already there, sitting in the back row with a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. He expected me to stand up and announce that the project was delayed due to unforeseen financial discrepancies. He expected to step in as the savior. Instead, I stood at the podium and pulled up a presentation. But it wasn't the blueprints for the Harbor Point waterfront. Members of the council, I began, my voice echoing through the hall. Before we discuss the future of our city, I must address a matter of security. It appears that there has been an attempt to subvert the financial and intellectual integrity of this project. I clicked the remote. The giant screen behind me displayed the logs from the night before. It showed the IP address of Robert Sterling's penthouse. It showed the login attempts using the stolen codes. The room went silent. Robert Sterling stood up, his face turning a sickly shade of purple. This is a fabrication. Thorne is unhinged. He's trying to cover up his own incompetence. The digital signatures don't lie, Robert, I said calmly, and neither does the audio recording I'm about to play. I pressed a key and Sarah's voice filled the chambers, discussing the theft, the paycheck with a pulse, and the plan to bankrupt the city's project. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story and share your thoughts in the comments. Is there any turning back once the person you love is caught on tape planning your downfall? While the authorities were detaining Robert in the hallway, I headed back home. I didn't rush. I drove the speed limit, enjoying the quiet. I knew Sarah would be there, likely finishing her packing. I wanted to be there when the realization hit her, not out of a desire for cruelty, but for the finality of it. When I walked through the door, the house was in disarray. Suitcases were open on the bed in our master suite. Sarah was frantic, clutching a burner phone, her face pale. "Ethan, thank God you're home," she cried, while trying to launch into one last performance. "I just heard, Robert, he's been arrested. He tried to frame us, Ethan. We have to call the lawyers." "Stop," I said. The word was small, but it cut through her hysterics like a razor. "I heard you, Sarah. A week ago. In the kitchen. I heard everything you said about the paycheck with a pulse." I heard the laugh. I heard the disdain. She froze. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The sweet wife vanished, replaced by a woman whose eyes were filled with a pure, unadulterated venom. "So what?" she spat, her voice dropping an octave. "You're a boring, pathetic man, Ethan. You live for your rules and your measurements. I deserved more than a life in your shadow. I deserved the world. And you were just the ladder I used to reach it." The next several months were a brutal blur of depositions, court dates, and discovery. Because Sarah had used our joint assets to fund Robert's shell companies, she had committed multiple counts of wire fraud and money laundering. My lawyers were the best in the state, and they were relentless. We didn't just want a divorce. We wanted a total restoration of every cent she had siphoned away over the years. On Family Secrets and Revenge, we often see how greed blinds people to the trail they leave behind. Sarah had been so focused on the big score that she forgot that I was the one who designed the systems she was trying to exploit. Every time her lawyer tried to claim she was entitled to half of my architectural firm, we produced more evidence of her collaboration with Sterling. Oh, by the time the judge was finished, she wasn't just losing the house and the lifestyle. She was looking at a significant prison sentence for corporate espionage and fraud. As the investigation deepened, I discovered that Sarah wasn't working alone. She had help from within my own firm. My lead engineer, David, a man I had trusted for over a decade, had been the one helping her decipher the technical aspects of the design she stole for Robert. He had been promised a vice presidency at Sterling and Associates once I was out of the picture. It was a double betrayal that hit me almost as hard as Sarah's. I sat in my empty office after David was escorted out by security, looking at the empty chair where my friend used to sit. It made me realize that the worst thing she said about me was just the beginning. The rot had spread through my entire life, and I had been too busy building for others to notice the crumbling walls of my own world. The day of the final hearing arrived. Sarah looked haggard, the stress of the looming prison sentence finally breaking through her expensive skincare routine. Her lawyer tried to argue for a spousal support agreement, citing her contributions to my early career. I walked into the courtroom with a final recording Marcus Vance had secured. It wasn't just the phone call, it was a recording from the hotel bar where she and Robert had met. They weren't just talking about money, they were laughing about how they would crush me socially so I could never work in architecture again. The judge looked at the evidence, then at Sarah, and shook his head. "Mrs. Thorne, You didn't just leave this marriage. You tried to incinerate the man you swore to protect. With the trial over and Robert Sterling behind bars, the Harbor Point project moved forward under my sole direction. I was no longer the man I was before that anniversary. I was harder, more cautious, but also more focused. I sold the house in Oakridge. There were too many ghosts in those hallways. The echo of her fake laughter, the scent of her betrayal. I moved into a minimalist loft downtown, overlooking the river and the skyline I had helped build. It was a space designed for one, with no room for secrets. I spent my nights looking at the city lights, thinking about the structures we build around ourselves. We think we are safe behind our walls, but the real danger always comes from the person you let through the front door. Was Sterling and Associates filed for bankruptcy 6 months later. The scandal of the Civic Center designs and the attempted theft of city funds ruined their reputation forever. Sarah is currently serving her sentence in a minimum security facility, her days of designer clothes and wine galas replaced by a gray uniform and a schedule she doesn't control. My engineer, David, he was blacklisted from the industry, unable to find work even as a draftsman. Revenge isn't always about a grand gesture. Sometimes it's just about letting the consequences of someone's own actions catch up to them. I didn't have to destroy them. I just had to provide the light for them to show the world who they really were. If you were in my shoes facing a situation like this, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments below. My name is Ethan Thorne, and I am no longer a man who is easily fooled. I still build structures, but now I make sure the foundations are inspected 100 times over. I look for the truth, even when it's ugly, because a painful truth is always better than a beautiful lie. Thank you so much for joining me for this journey on family secrets and revenge. It's stories like these that remind us that the people we love are often the ones who hold the power to hurt us the most, but they also give us the chance to find out how strong we really are. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us keep uncovering the truths that stay hidden behind closed doors. Let us know your overall thoughts on my story in the comments. I truly value your perspective. Until next time, keep your eyes open.